Dead Pixel Society podcast listeners, registration is now open for Photo Imaging Connect, March 16th and 17th at the Rio in Las Vegas. In a special partnership with WPPI, the Photo Imaging Connect is the executive-level conference, bringing together the photo imaging industry to discuss trends, opportunities, new technologies, and more in an intimate setting. Go now to photoimagingconnect.com today to register and use code PIC30 for 30% off. Welcome to the Dead Pixel Society podcast, the photo imaging industry's leading news source. Here's your host, Gary Peugeot. The Dead Pixel Society podcast is brought to you by Mediaclip, Advertech Printing, and Independent Photo Imagers.
Hello again and welcome to the Dead Pixel Society podcast. I'm your host, Gary Peugeot, and today we're joined by Patrick Condy, the founder of PKC Media. He is a visual content creator of all kinds, and he's coming to us from the Isle of Wight. I think he's the first guest from the Isle of Wight. So welcome, Patrick. How are you today?
Hi, Gary. Thanks for having me on. Yes, I'm coming to you from the Isle of Wight here in the UK, across the pond. All very good here. A bit chilly on our side of the water, but all very good, and looking forward to getting into talking about it on here.
Are you from the Isle of Wight? Is that where you started from, or is that where your business is located?
My business is located here. I'm originally from Scotland. My accent has somewhat disappeared now. After a couple of gin and tonics, it comes straight back out. So you might hear a little twang every now and then, but it's mostly softened. But I moved here for business.
Okay.
My work as a photographer takes me into the water sports and sailing space, and this is the sort of mecca for it in the UK. That's what brought me here almost 8 years ago now.
Oh, okay. So that was kind of my question. So you started in Scotland. Is that where your interest in photography started, and how did that start?
Yeah, my interest in photography started there alongside sailing. Sailing and my business are so intertwined. It is within sailing.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up sailing up there with my family, and I had a knee injury, and my father bought me a camera for Christmas one year because I wasn't able to walk and go very far, and he drove me around and taking pictures, and I fell in love with it from there. And I decided my degree in sports was not as fun as taking pictures. And so I went down the route of taking pictures and has ever since continued to grow. And that led me to moving here as an intern, working at a place called OC Sport. And we had a global tour of sailing boats that would go around and race in different cities. And I was the intern with the camera running around, and that's where it all started. And that's where I sort of started founding myself, self-employed, and then a small business at PKC Media. So that's how it started.
So what kind of sports were you involved in? Just the sailing? You said you were into...
Yeah, so that's a good question, Gary. We do a lot of mainly sailing, but there's a lot of different disciplines within sailing. You have Grand Prix sailing, so like your Formula Ones that go around a track. We also have offshore sailing, which is a big focus area of mine, which I try and relate it to other sports would be kind of like rally or the Dakar. They'll disappear off for 2 to 3 weeks and race across the Atlantic or race around the world. I can't go on that one, but we go on lots, and it's our job to try and tell these stories. And then the other sports that I focus on we have a lot of surfing here, and kind of general water sports, wing foiling, and other bits and bobs like that go on in the water or on it is the place for me. I've dabbled in a couple of bits of Formula E and some other sports, but for me, it's the stories around the ocean and that get told in the ocean and the sports that happen there. For me, that's the interest.
That's very interesting, because I imagine it's very, very difficult to even break into that. So you said you started with another company, OC Sport, right, as an intern, and then how long were you in the business before you broke off on your own and started PKC Media?
Basically, it was 8 months as an intern there, and really found my love for it. But the sport is fickle in its jobs.
Exactly.
Our industry runs on sponsorship,
right,
and sports sponsorship. So anything to do with sports sponsorship is somewhat fickle. And that was my first time being made redundant from that job, and I thought, this isn't very nice. So I thought maybe I don't want to do that again. And so I set up PKC Media just essentially for myself to contract myself out to a number of different people,
Right.
and that's what I did. And then it meant that I could have a few different revenue streams. I wasn't just working for one person, and along the way, I have found myself, solely contracting to somebody for a period of time. But it's always enabled me to have well, I'm just gonna do something else on the side that interests me, and I think that's always been the winner. Is that I love taking pictures of sailing
Hmm.
and offshore sailing, but if there's something else that really interests me, I'm like, oh, I think maybe I'll just try that out a bit as well,
Yeah.
and that's what setting up myself has really enabled me to do.
This is just fascinating because you must be putting the camera systems to extreme tests because you're moving, your subjects are moving, the background is moving. I mean, I'm not, this is not a gear podcast, but I'm just curious, what is it that you use for that?
Yeah, I mean, you're right, Gary. The environments are some of the harshest that really you can take a camera to.
Mhm.
I've been through many over the years, and I've sat on all sides. I have tried Sony's, I've tried Canons, I even tried some Fuji's. I've tried them all,
Mhm.
but I always come back to the Nikons, or
Mhm.
the Americans. You call them Nikons. I'm
Mhm.
not making fun, but I always have the conversation with international people when they say Nikon and I say Nikon, but we know
Exactly.
we know who we mean.
Yeah.
For me, it's a little bit of a personal preference in that the first camera way back when that my dad bought me, which was I still have it. I still have the original camera that started the business. It was a Nikon. And then so ever since then, the button layouts, yes, they change and you're much fancier cameras, but the ethos is the same. And there's part of it for that.
Mhm.
But then I made a big switch to Canon
Mhm.
and did enjoy them and had lots about them, but they kept dying. They kept dying. They get salty and wet, and they would die.
Hmm.
Through about 3 or 4 in a year, and thought that's it, and went back to the Nikons, and now I'm using two Z9s and an older Z7 for when it's really wet and horrible. I take that one up because I know that I can get a good picture from it. But if it dies, I'm not going to be too upset.
So what causes the death of a camera? I mean, I think the obvious would be just water, and I'm sure you've got housings and things to cope with that, but is it just salt air? Is it what's the
Yeah, so salty air really kills them off. I mean, normally it's usually a big wave that I haven't seen. I have housings and
I'm sorry.
rubber
I shouldn't
covers.
laugh at that, but that just sounds
No, no. Usually what happens because you forget, the sailor or the subject is facing the way of the ocean, and I'm my back to it normally, so I usually get caught out, and it will be in those moments where I think, oh, that sunrise is just perfect, and I don't have time to put it in the housing or whatever, and you end up with the bare camera, and you think I'll risk it, and that's when the
so it's user
and
error. So
yeah, it's risking it. Sometimes for the shot, it's worth it. That's usually worth it. But that's what kills them off. And it's cruel. It's very cruel because they get wet and you dry them out and
right.
they sort of come back to life. But then it's like a slow death over the next few months. The salt that's got in them just slowly
Eats them.
kills them off.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not very nice, unfortunately, for them.
Oh goodness. So, and of course, Nikon, I'm going to use your phrase since we're in your world, had the Nikonos system, where they were literally the platform for underwater photography for so many years. So there's a lot of heritage there with Nikon.
Yeah, and actually, I have when I've been a naughty boy and forgotten to put my housing on, or I've had a housing flood, which is pretty exciting. The Nikons do seem to actually. I flooded this very Z9 that I'm using now in a housing, and it had a full drenching, and it's still so far. It's a year and a half later, is surviving.
Oh,
So
wow.
far.
So I want to talk a little bit about where you are. I mean, is there like another boat that is like a media boat, or are you embedded with a team? And who pays for that? Who's hiring you?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and it's very dependent. So the business model works on a few different ways. So the team themselves will hire me internally, and that usually means that I'm on board the yacht that's racing or on board one of the team's ribs,
Hmm.
and so the sports team is paying for me, but they are getting their money from a sponsor. So somebody wants their title down the side of the vessel.
Right.
They're paying the team for that, and then they use that to pay me. And that's the easiest form. That's the most common.
Hmm.
Uh, the other one you'll have is the races themselves. The organizers
Right.
will want coverage of the race, and so they'll employ me to
Mhm.
cover the race starts or finishes or parts of the race. And then the most complicated and somewhat outdated system, which started when I was around, was going to events on my own back, taking pictures and selling them individually to participants at the events. And that was the norm in our industry and has been for a long time.
Mhm.
And when I first started sailing and going to these events, I was a poor student and I didn't want to pay, 50, £60 for a picture of me sailing. And I thought this model doesn't work because I would see people take screenshotting from the website and just posting with
Yeah.
the watermark. I thought, this doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's a waste of why bother? And so I changed my focus, and I never really sought after that. I always thought that that's going to leave that to the older blokes. And I
Well, it's
to,
funny you just said because over one of my friends of the podcast is a guy named Haim Ariev who runs the Glossy Finish, and they do sports photography, and he has a system for doing action sports photography, and it's kind of similar to what you do, right? People pay for the service, and he calls the what you say the old blokes that process. He calls that spray and pray, right? You take a ton
yeah,
of pictures and you pray someone buys one.
yeah, exactly. And I just think it never worked. And so I tried it out, and nobody ever bought any. And I thought, well, it's not because my pictures are terrible. I think it's just a rubbish model.
Mhm.
And I went down targeting the teams and the organizations, and actually that makes a lot more sense. And it's about how you market that. So for
Right.
instance, I say to the organizers, you need to advertise to the people that are paying you that they're getting images for free, that they don't have to then pay for them. And slowly over the years, it's becoming the norm. People enter sailing events or go to races and they know that they'll get images for free, part of the entry.
Hmm.
So it's been an interesting development in the model of the business in that it's moved with the times, the digital times now. That's how it works.
Speaking of moving with the digital times, you also do some videography and you also do some drone.
Yeah.
What's that like on the open seas using drones? It's got to be harrying or horrible.
Yeah, that's the I say, I think my photography and videography skills and storytelling is good, but I often say part of my big appeal and why I ended up having a job was the ability to fly drones
Mhm.
on these yachts. And so imagine driving down a country lane at 30 miles an hour, where it's water spraying in the window. And inside these boats, it can be 120 decibels. So it's being like stood next to roadworks. So it's a not a very nice environment. And then trying to fly a drone is pretty tricky. And the bit that's challenging is that there is only 10 or 20 so people in the world that do this.
Right.
And the drones aren't made for that. So the drones don't like to take off while they're moving. They don't like being at sea. The image gets confused. The image sensing gets confused.
Right.
And the worst part is that your controller doesn't have any GPS in it. So it doesn't know where it is.
Right.
So the drone knows where it took off, which can be 4 kilometers that way. And so the
Right.
whole time you have to fight the
So
system
the
to
whole
update.
return to base function is useless.
Useless. Not that I am the return to base function, Gary. That's my job in this.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it's pretty tricky, and we do lose them. But look, and I don't feel good about putting plastic in the ocean, but in terms of our other options, it's helicopters, and they're a lot more costly,
Mhm.
by almost tenfold, and they're a lot worse for the environment to have those things flying around in the sky. So they really have changed the way that we tell our sports story and take pictures. And I think drones in general for the wider photography community have just changed the game unbelievably. It's accessible to everybody now for $200.
Yeah. What would a typical like you have an objective when you're launching a drone, you probably have a shot or a visual in mind, right? That you're trying to capture, right? Because, a boat crossing the sunset or whatever. What kind of planning goes into doing that kind of thing? Because that's got to be so much pre-visualization and planning, more
Yeah.
so than anything else.
Yeah, and part of it is planning, and part of it is being ready because I'm not in control of the boat. I am a little like, in terms that I can ask. I'm a sailor myself, so I understand the environment. So I know what's going to happen when, roughly. And I can ask the sailors to move the boat in a certain way.
Mhm.
But I'm not in control of the environment at all. And so
Right.
you have to just basically be ready to fly when you feel there's a good moment. So, for instance, I'll tell you a story. We go offshore on these boats for extended periods of time to capture assets. And we did a 2 week trip down to Portugal. And I remember specifically
I'm
lying in
so
my
sorry
bunk.
you had to do that.
Well, we never got to Portugal. We just
Okay.
got there and got back on the boat. I remember lying in my bunk and thinking, oh, it's feeling a bit more rough. And I could see this weird light coming through. And I thought, I think we've picked up speed and it's probably about sunset and something good is happening. And I got up and I'm in my, underwear and I think, oh, this is amazing. I've got to take a picture of this. And I launched the drone and I can remember being stood on the back of this boat doing almost top speed in my pants, flying the drone, trying to capture these images. So there is pre-planning, but the planning is having, it sounds silly, but having the box and the case
Mhm.
that's usable and having the drone charged and the organization around that, and then just getting the moment at the time. So that's the challenge.
And the logistics of just, I mean, I don't know what brand drone you use, but you don't get a lot of life out of those things in terms of battery.
No, so we're using I use DJIs and usually whatever the most recent model is. The fastest one is the wind speeds are a challenge for myself, and
Yeah.
so that's what I use. But you've got to be organized with the charging the batteries, and you only get now 25 minutes out of them, but 5 minutes of that is landing. I'm pretty quick at landing, but the boat is moving a lot, and you're moving, and so landing takes a minute. So you've got
Yeah.
to be pretty quick with knowing when you're ready to go.
Yeah. So your actual useful video time is 15, 20 minutes tops.
Yeah, that's about it. So you launch with 100%, and if I'm getting down to, when I'm getting to 40%, I'm getting nervous,
Yeah.
so you don't end up with long.
So have you ever had one like drop off, like when it's on the approach and it's gonna make it and then it just dies?
Yeah, and it's the worst feeling because you can see it go, and you're so close, but you're so not. And
I mean,
it's
what can you
brutal.
do? I mean, you can't tell the boat to turn around and retrieve it.
Yeah, and they sink. They're gone instantly. They
Yeah.
sink. I've lost a few now, and they're gone. And the only thing, if it's really, really windy and we're struggling to get them back on, the sail of the boat is soft and it's hard to damage. So I'll often, if I'm really gonna, I know the shot is worth it, and I'm not gonna get the drone back. I'll fly the drone into the sail, and then the drone breaks, but I get the memory card. That's the important bit.
Because it's not streaming, is it? So you have to have the card out of it.
Yeah, and when they are streaming, it's streaming in such low quality that it's almost no use. It's almost more hurtful that you have that than you have the
Because
original
you're killing
file.
your battery, is what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly that. So it's a challenge all in all, but
Mhm.
that's what makes the job exciting, and that's when you get those images, what makes it worth it.
So on the business side of this, you've got, marketing, promotion, and all this other stuff. And you managed to have a business doing it. What advice do you have for people who are looking to get into like a niche like this? I mean, I don't want people to come in and start competing with you, but there's a ton of other niches that people could do this kind of thing. I'm thinking like rock climbing or
Yeah.
mountaineering or something like that. So if someone was interested in getting into this kind of business, uh, what do you think would be essential for, I mean, besides obviously having a passion for the category, right? Being a passion for the
Yeah.
niche, I think is number one.
I think it's a good question actually, and I think I thought about this before. It's nothing to do with the equipment or how you approach it or anything. I think, as you say, having a passion, but also an understanding that you have to earn your place there.
Mhm.
In terms of, and I don't mean this in that, you need to go and be an intern or anything else. You need to gain the trust of the people that are doing it, and they will see, God, this guy really loves it, and he actually wants to tell my story.
Yeah.
And then suddenly all the doors are flung open for you.
Mhm.
And then you get into the equipment and understanding the niche and working with suppliers that that's been a big one for me is working with, I've done some stuff with Nikon and Outex, which are a housing company, on the products because they didn't quite work for me in this niche. And I reach out to them and say, look, I love this. I love the product. I need your help to help me with it. And again, people can feel the passion and then they go, okay, why should we help this chap? And he goes, they can see what you do and they earn the respect and then the doors are opened. And that for me is the biggest advice is to to earn the place to open the door. And once the door is open, you got to run straight through it, and then it goes.
The business side of it is kind of interesting, I think, to me, because you mentioned gear and stuff like that almost down below the actual relationship side of it. Do you think it is valuable for people to have been a competitor or a enthusiast in an event to become a photographer or a storyteller, if you will, in the category? Because you have a sailing background, but you never were able to really compete in it. Do you think that's important?
100%. I really do. And I think that if you have any sort of understanding about the sport, then really engaging in it before you even bother taking a picture of it,
Right.
go and watch every YouTube there is to watch about it, or really invest about what it is.
Mhm.
And then you will understand the stories. And that for me that's the key from a business is it doesn't matter how you're going to take the picture in the first instance, that it matters after.
Mhm.
But to be able to open the door, you need to understand what door you're knocking on, and that for me is the big thing, is understanding who you're speaking to and what their story is.
And I imagine you have some credibility in
Yeah,
the
I think
sense
that
that
helps.
you know what you can ask for and what you shouldn't ask for at certain times.
Yeah, exactly. Like, for instance, if I'm not going to ask one of the sailors that I work with right in the intense moment of changing a sail, which is a very difficult physical process. Oh, sorry, could you just do that again? They'd tell me to go away in not so polite terms. And they have. And I have asked those questions
Mhm.
and I've learned my lesson.
Right.
But you have to go make those mistakes. And then you realize, oh, actually, you're privileged to be in that space and you have to, and sometimes you can. For me, the relationship of a photographer and as a business,
Mhm.
you're always using your tokens. You're earning your tokens. And thanks very much. I'm doing a good job for you. I'm doing a good job.
Mhm.
Oh, by the way, now I do actually need you to do that again. But here are more my tokens that I'm going to cash in to make you do that again for me.
Right. Right.
That's my
Mhm.
kind of way. Sometimes that I treat some of the clients is that you got to use the relationship occasionally to better the picture. They then realize, oh, okay, he was worth it for that picture.
Do you get like a shot list or an objective when you're covering things, or if you're covering something for a brand? Let's say, for example, you've worked with some big brands. Maybe one of those big brands says, "Hey, we're sponsoring this boat," or I shouldn't say boat. That's probably not the right word.
No, no, it's correct. Yeah, you're
Okay.
right.
All right. Well, I didn't want to, I don't know if a yacht or
No,
racer or schooner or whatever. So do they give you, a shot list per se of covering the event for their brand? Or are they trusting you to tell their story that way?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Are you ready for 2025? If you're in the imaging industry, you need to be at Photo Imaging Connect, March 16th and 17th at the Rio in Las Vegas. This is an executive level event bringing together various sectors of the photo imaging industry to discuss trends, opportunities, new technologies, and more. Meet old friends and make new ones. Go now to photoimagingconnect.com today to register and use code PIC30 for 30% off.
That's an interesting question. And actually, I think this is one of the areas that I feel I've had some success in delivering is that from being somebody that did the social media and from both ends, I would do the end to end, taking the picture, making the document, making the pitch decks, publishing things on the website. I know what is needed on the marketing side.
Right.
And I know I take that rather than trying to understand a good picture, I go, okay, clothing brand A that's employed me, I know that you need this for your website. So I know that you don't care if it's a lovely picture. You care if your brand is nice and your jacket's there.
Exactly.
That's been the key, I think, for me as a photographer and a storyteller is because the brands are the people that are paying.
Right.
They're paying either me directly in the photo shoot or they're paying the team to put the brand on the boat or the team member.
Right.
That's the whole thing. So the brand is always paying. And so you always have to cater to them. And I see some photographers, yes, it's a beautiful picture, but there's no branding in it. And so there's no value to that. And I've employed people for various teams and other things for photo shoots. And I think, where's the branding? The brand are paying you.
Right.
You've got not a single picture, and so there's no point. And so there is sometimes briefs, but now I get to a point where there's some trust there, and they know that actually I'm here for you and for the brand, and that's what it is. And don't get me wrong, I still take those beautiful pictures, but they have different use cases. That's been the key, is just understanding the need of
Mhm.
who's employing you.
When you go to a shoot and you see those beautiful pictures, who owns all those? Right. Let's say, for example, you wanted to, and I know stock photography is a terrible business to be in, but let's
Yeah.
say, for example, you were to wanted to build a stock portfolio of pretty ships on the seas and the sunsets and whatnot, and you wanted to license it, or somebody came to you and say, "Hey, can I license that?" Can you do that? Who owns this stuff?
So again, another, as you say, stock photography is a world of grey areas and trips and trap falls, and similar for mine. I'm not in stock photography, but I like to, where possible, keep the rights for myself because I might want to print them, coffee table book that I'm working on doing, and other things like that. So there's a negotiation that happens. Some clients want just for them, only for them, and then I have to say, okay, well, you're going to have to pay a little bit more for if you want exclusive rights,
Right.
and usually it's quite significantly more. And then they say, "Ooh, no thanks," and then I get to remain the rights. And I play the game. You know, I know what are their headline pictures, and they're going to be the ones with the jacket and the things that they want. I'm not going to use those, but I might use the pretty ones from that shoot. And so there's the trade-off. I'm not using the brand pictures. I'm using the nicer ones.
Right. And that's what I was getting to is there, I'm sure there's a lot of content you have that are not brand appropriate or brand nice, or I'm not sure what the word is,
Yes.
but
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
but still are great pictures. And if you signed over the rights to the whole shoot, they're kind of are not of use to anyone at that point.
Exactly. And thankfully, in our industry here in the UK, it's not super common to have exclusive rights.
Mhm.
So it does happen. It's very negotiated and it's very clear that that is what's happening. So it's much easier in a way.
How is that category of racing boats doing? Is it wildly popular? Is it becoming more popular? I'm curious because I know other sports that are kind of affluent adjacent, right? Like high-end golf and things like that are going through a lot of changes now with sponsorships and controlling bodies and things like that. What's happening in the world of boat racing?
Yeah, in the world of so my main genre is offshore racing, which is sort of off into big oceans, and a lot of it happens in France. The French, as a population, love it. They are fully invested. It's like NFL in the States. Everybody knows about it. Yeah. So the race that is happening at the moment is called the Vendée Globe. It happens from a region in France. 96% of France know about the race. So the whole country
Wow.
knows about it. So the Vendée Globe race is their Super Bowl. It's a huge, huge deal, and it's only getting bigger. It took a real spike in COVID because people were at home watching sports, and so it
And you could
inspired
be on
them.
a boat. You were isolated.
Yeah,
People could
exactly.
compete.
So COVID was good for sailing in some sense,
Yeah.
to grow the sport, and then year on year it is growing. But yeah, we're seeing a change in sailing that it's all moving forwards, but it's the expensive ones, the bigger, higher end teams are growing, and the smaller, lower end teams are struggling with budgets and finding cash is becoming harder. So there's growth at the top and growth at the very bottom, but the middle bit is becoming trickier. It's interesting for me in that most of my business will always happen at the top,
Right.
and not so much in the middle. So at current, it's not affected us a huge amount here. So we'll see what continues to happen.
Who are the typical sponsors of this sport? Are they like international brands? Are they French brands? I'm just curious if I tune in on YouTube to watch one of these things, who am I going to see?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we've had a few big ones over the years that I've worked for. So Hugo Boss, the clothing manufacturer and company, they were a big sponsor for many, many years of a team I worked for. L'Occitane en Provence, which some people may have heard of, is a cosmetic and skincare brand that were very large in Europe and France and Asia, pushing out there. So they're one. And then you have things like, I'm trying to think, Chiral. They make burgers. So they make all the French meat burgers in France. So they're kind of a bit like, you probably haven't heard of a brand called Bird's Eye, but food manufacturers are
Mm,
quite common.
okay.
McDonald's sponsors a boat as well. So there's a few
Really?
of those. Yeah. McDonald's France sponsor one of the boats, so there's quite a range of people that sponsor these things. So Emirates as well, they sponsor some stuff. So it's a big range. It's
Yeah, that is the big range going from Hugo Boss down to McDonald's. That's
yes, exactly. So and it's a lot dependent on what the company's objectives are. For us with Hugo Boss, alongside that, we launched a clothing line. We were the sole faces of the clothing line, was the sailing clothing line that was meant for the marine environment and by the beach and the sea and everything. And so it worked. The synergy was there. And for McDonald's, she talks a lot about food health.
Well, I was thinking the filet o fish is what I was going.
Yeah. I have to say I've never tried one of those, but they and at the end of the day, they're eyeballs on the logo.
Right.
That's what they're paying for some of
Right.
the time as well. So the McDonald's is eyeballs on the logo.
And your job is to make what that eyeball sees very good.
Yeah, and the prime example is we've employed people when they used to cut off the Hugo Boss. They'd have half. They'd have Hugo, and you're like, well, you've literally taken a picture of half of the logo.
Yeah.
So no use, I'm afraid. And so that was always the one where if you can service the brand, you'll be within a job and you'll have a business.
Well, Patrick, it's been great talking to you. Where can people go to see your work and learn more about PKC Media?
Thanks, Gary. Yeah, it has been great. And I know it's been short, but it's been really interesting to chat. And people can take a look at my website at pkcmedia.com or hit me up on Instagram. That's where you'll see lots of behind the scenes stuff. Last night, for example, some splashing around in the garden with a hose trying to take some pictures, which you would never know were taken in a back garden. So
Well, I
that
definitely
kind of
want to
fun,
check that out.
yeah, that kind of fun happens on Instagram. So hit me up there.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Patrick. Good to see you, and stay safe out there.
Yeah, thanks again, Gary.
Thank you for listening to the Dead Pixel Society podcast. Read more great stories and sign up for the newsletter at www.thedeadpixelssociety.com. Photo Imaging Connect, March 16th and 17th at the Rio in Las Vegas is coming up fast. Registration closes March 7th. Learn about the latest industry trends, opportunities, and more in an intimate setting. Go now to photoimagingconnect.com today to register and use code PIC30 for 30% off.